Tucked into the back study of the Charleston Maritime Library, I was immersed in an annotated logbook from the 18th century when a familiar voice broke the silence. "Still hiding with the old books, Elise?" my cousin Grant called, smirking from the threshold. "Ever considered joining us in the 21st century?" I looked up slowly. He wore a slim-cut charcoal suit that screamed Wall Street, his hair perfectly coiffed, his watch glinting like a status symbol. Definitely the kind of guy who thought a yacht was a personality trait. "Didn't expect to see you this far from a trading floor," I said calmly, tucking the fragile logbook into its custom cradle. He stepped closer, the scent of designer cologne trailing him. "Your mom asked me to stop by. She's worried you'll embarrass her at the anniversary gala tonight." Grant swept his eyes over the room, all dusty ledgers and antique globes. A librarian in the family. Still, hard to explain at fundraising galas. "I'm Elise Carrington, 36. On paper, I'm the head curator of the Charleston Maritime Library. To the Carrington family, real estate moguls and political donors, I'm the quiet oddity. They deal in influence and headlines. I deal in legacy and silence." "I'll be there," I said, standing, "and I'll make sure my shoes don't squeak." Grant grinned. "Good. I'll be announcing Carrington Holdings' expansion into fintech. Just signed a multi-million-dollar merger." "That's impressive," I replied neutrally, though I already knew every detail. "Because my firm brokered it." He tilted his head. "There's still time to make a real impact, Elise. You've got the brains. Join us. Do something that matters." I almost laughed. What he didn't know, my maritime archive was a front. Beneath it, I ran Solera Metrics, a $70 billion zero-cents private intelligence firm advising global defense, trade, and infrastructure policy. "I'm exactly where I need to be," I said, escorting him out with a smile. Once the door clicked shut, I returned to the back room. The old map case was just camouflage. Behind it, encrypted servers purred to life. The next phase of Solera's expansion had already begun. "Something a little more formal," I told Simone, easing into the salon chair. "Big family event tonight?" As she worked through my curls, I scrolled through the final Solaris acquisition agreement on my encrypted tablet. By sunrise, Solera Metrics would be my firm, would officially own the predictive analytics company that Carrington Holdings had spent the last years circling like vultures. Simone raised an eyebrow in the mirror. "Let me guess, they still think you're the bookworm in the archives?" I smiled faintly. "For about 6 more hours." Because after tonight, they'd know who I really was. But on my terms, and with maximum impact. She clipped the final strand in place and casually added, "Your cousin Grant was here earlier, talking up some massive merger his firm's working on." "He's trying to close it," I said smoothly. "There's a difference." Simone gave me a look, half curiosity, half admiration, as I reached for my clutch. "I hope I get to see what happens when the truth comes out." "Oh, you will," I said, rising. "Just not tonight." Back at my apartment on East Bay Street, I stood before the antique mirror passed down from my great-grandmother. The transformation was quiet but exacting. Gone was the cardigan-clad curator. In her place stood a poised, inscrutable figure who could walk into a Senate fundraiser or a Fortune 100 gala without raising suspicion. My charcoal gown draped perfectly, clean lines, classic cut. My only jewelry, a slim Cartier timepiece and an emerald ring once worn by my grandmother. Subtle nods to wealth with no need to announce it. A notification buzzed. "Lena, contract executed. Press release queued. Revealed tonight?" Me. "No. Let them toast their wins. Tomorrow will be louder." By the time I pulled into the Carrington estate, the circular driveway shimmered with luxury. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and glinting Teslas. I arrived in a polished black Audi. Understated, quiet power. No one blinked. Roy, our longtime family butler, opened the grand door with a knowing smile. "Welcome home, Miss Elise. Your family is waiting in the ballroom." Inside the Carrington estate, the air shimmered with old Southern money. Quiet violin notes from a live quartet, the faint clink of Waterford crystal, and decades of curated charm. "Elise, darling, you look almost polished," my mother called from across the grand hall. From Margot Carrington, that was basically heartfelt praise. At 68, she wore Charleston society like a second skin. Tonight she was regal in sapphire silk, her hair swept into a sculpted chignon, diamond studs flickering beneath the chandelier's glow. "Happy anniversary, Mom," I said, placing a kiss on her cheek. "Your father's near the hearth," she replied, already eyeing the Langfords and Rutledges across the room. "Try not to vanish into a side hallway, will you?" As I drifted through the party, I endured the usual tight-lipped smiles and carefully rehearsed compliments. "Ill with the library, Elise? How quaint. Must be so peaceful, all those old maps and ship logs." I nodded graciously, offering non-committal replies. Let them play their game. Tomorrow would bring a new scoreboard. "There she is!" my father roared from beside the fireplace, drink in hand. Charles Carrington was surrounded by old-school financiers and retired judges, all thick Southern drawl and thicker egos. He enveloped me in a warm, boozy hug. "Don't let her fool you, boys. This one's got the whole family's brain." Peter Langford, his lifelong golf buddy, chuckled. "Still dusting off sea charts, Elise?" "Preserving maritime history," I replied, smooth as aged bourbon. "Someone has to." Laughter followed, soft, dismissive, harmless to them. "Speaking of legacy," Dad puffed out his chest, "where's Grant? He's got big news tonight." As if on cue, Grant Carrington entered the room with the smooth confidence of a man who'd never once been underestimated. His tux was cut to perfection, his champagne flute barely tilted, his grin gleaming with self-importance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, raising his glass, "may I steal a moment of your attention?" The room fell into anticipatory hush. Grant thrived on spectacle, but he was about to learn that tonight he wasn't the only one holding the spotlight. As many of you know, Carrington Holdings has been expanding aggressively this year. Grant began, his voice rich with authority and flair. "And tonight, I'm honored to share that we're finalizing the largest acquisition in our firm's history. By next week, we expect to close on Virion Analytics." The room reacted on cue, gasps, polite applause, impressed murmurs among Charleston's elite. My father looked like he might float straight into the chandelier, pride blooming across his face. My mother clutched her pearls with practiced emotion, dabbing at the corner of one eye. I took a slow sip of champagne and waited. "It's not signed just yet," Grant added, letting suspense color his tone, "but all documents are in legal review. The deal is ours, just a matter of formality." "That's my boy," my father crowed, clapping him on the back. "Born to lead." As the crowd closed in with congratulations, Grant's gaze swept the room and landed on me. He raised his glass, smile razor sharp. "What about you, Cousin Elise?" he called across the room. "Ready to trade those dusty ship logs for something that actually moves markets? Or still playing dress-up with antique compasses?" I met his gaze squarely. "I think," I said, letting each word land, "you shouldn't celebrate until the ink is dry and the acquisition clears compliance." A few guests chuckled, but the tone was noticeably uncertain. Grant's grin flickered. "Still cryptic," he said with a shrug. "That's the problem with your world. It's all footnotes and fantasy. We're out here making history, not archiving it." "Perhaps," I replied, lifting my glass. "But some of us check the footnotes before quoting the headline." He didn't like that. His jaw tightened. He never had much patience for nuance, especially when it hinted I knew something he didn't. "I've got the best attorneys on the East Coast," he said. "This thing's locked down." I clinked my glass gently to his. "Then I suppose we'll both enjoy the morning news." He opened his mouth to respond, but my mother's voice rang out, crisp and commanding. "Dinner is served." The guests turned, their conversations shifting toward truffle risottos and vintage Bordeaux. By tomorrow, they'd be talking about something else entirely. If you've been quietly rooting for Elise Carrington from the sidelines, now's the time to hit subscribe, because in the next chapter, the empire she built in silence finally steps into the spotlight. As the guests drifted into the dining room, I felt a familiar blend of detachment and quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow was already written, and it would be unforgettable. I slipped into my assigned seat at the far end of the massive walnut dining table. The placement wasn't random. It never was. In the Carrington family, proximity to power was a map, and I'd been placed neatly out of view. At the other end, Grant held court with ease, one hand on his wine glass, the other gesturing animatedly as guests laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. He was the crown prince tonight. Let him revel. I turned my focus to the rosemary-crusted duck in front of me. The chef had done remarkable work. If nothing else, the night was worth it for the meal. Beside me, Eleanor Rutledge leaned over, her pearls glowing beneath the chandelier. You were always brilliant, Elise. Everyone expected you to change the world. Why hide away in that dusty old library? I let her question settle before replying smoothly. Libraries teach more than history. They teach pattern recognition. What to question? What's missing? She blinked. Well, at least Grant is doing something impactful. It must be difficult, watching him outshine you. Not as difficult as you might assume, I said, smiling gently. The meal continued. A parade of compliments edged with quiet condescension, the kind I'd learned to wear like silk. When dessert arrived, a trio of flourless chocolate cake, lemon tart, and fig panna cotta, Grant rose with theatrical flourish, glass raised. To Mom and Dad, he said, voice warm, practiced, confident, who taught me how to lead, and to my dear cousin Elise, who reminds us that success can be quiet, sometimes too quiet to notice. Polite laughter rippled through the room. I smiled, raising my glass in turn. But my mind was already on the Solerametrics press release, scheduled for 9 o'clock IE. Later, at the espresso cart, Grant found me. Having fun? It's a beautiful evening, I replied, savoring the bitterness. Our family has so much to be proud of. They are, Grant said, adjusting his cufflinks with exaggerated precision. Would have been nice if both of us had built something worth toasting. I picked up a dark chocolate truffle from the dessert spread, turning it slowly between my fingers. You know, Grant, success isn't always measured by who talks the loudest. He gave a short laugh. Tell that to my market returns. Remind me, how much does a library curator make again? I glanced down at my understated Manolo Blahnik heels and smiled. Enough to buy these in 3 colors. I've always made smart investments. He downed the rest of his champagne, already checking his phone. Well, he said, pocketing it with flair. I've got bigger things to prepare for. Tomorrow's the day. Virion Analytics becomes a Carrington asset. He strolled off, shoulders high, buzzed on ego and assumptions. Once he disappeared into the crowd, I reached into my clutch and tapped out a message to Lena. Me, everything on schedule for tomorrow? Her response was instant. Lena, locked. Press release goes live at 8 o'clock IMing. Want a preview? Me. No need, I'll enjoy reading it with the rest of the country. By midnight, the gala had dulled into murmurs and soft jazz. I made my farewells, absorbing the last round of thin compliments and family fixations. You know, my mother murmured as I kissed her cheek goodbye, Grant offered to find you a role in the company archive. It would give you structure, relevance. I'll consider it, I said, eyes kind. I wouldn't. As I drove home beneath Charleston's quiet street lamps, the city blurred softly past the windshield. For nearly a decade, I'd been the footnote in the Carrington family story, the woman who preferred history over headlines. But in a few hours, everything would change. At 7 o'clock IMing, I unlocked the side door of the Charleston Maritime Library, just like I had every weekday for years. My low heels echoed against the marble floor. To the public, I was still Elise Carrington, head curator, quiet, unassuming. Lena was already inside, blonde hair tied back, tablet in hand. Here she was, assistant archivist. Upside these walls she was COO of Solerametrics. Everything's prepped, Lena said as she stepped into my office, the morning light spilling across the maritime maps behind me. Tokyo is online, Zurich is standing by, and the press release goes live in 45. I set my structured leather bag on the side table and powered up my secure terminal. Any signs of movement from Grant's legal team? They're scrambling, still convinced Virion is theirs. She gave a wry smile. Let's allow them a few more minutes of blissful denial. At exactly 7:15 a.m., my encrypted line buzzed. I answered. Miss Carrington, came a calm voice through the interpreter. The Virion board is assembled and prepared. Excellent, I replied. Let's begin. The next 10 minutes were precise and quiet. Digital signatures, verified confirmations, seals transmitted in real time. At exactly 8:00 a.m. Solera Metrics had officially acquired Virion Analytics, including its international subsidiaries, data patents, and advanced R&D assets. Press release is live, Lena said, watching her screen refresh. I opened my browser. Every major outlet carried the headline in bold. From character to power player. Elise Carrington acquires $4 analytics in surprise, $4.20 deal. Raking. Mystery buyer behind Solera Metrics, revealed. Wall Street reels as librarian unveils billion-dollar empire. My phone vibrated with a cascade of calls and alerts. The first call, unsurprisingly, was from Grant. What the hell is this? He barked. No hello, no preamble, just disbelief edged with rage. Good morning to you too, cousin, I said, calm as ever, sipping my espresso. I assume you've seen the news. This is a joke. Solera Metrics? That's you? You're not the founder. Actually, I am. Have been for 8 years now. I let it settle, then added, I get the confusion. I mean, I'm just a curator, right? On the other end of the line, I heard the telltale chaos, papers being rustled, voices rising in alarm. Grant was unraveling. But I had a deal, he stammered. Everything was in place. Signatures, counsel. Was it? I asked sweetly. You may want to revisit the fine print. We've been negotiating with Virion for months. So have we, I cut in, voice steady. My team, my company, my empire. Each word landed like a gavel. The one I built while you and the rest of the family were too busy mocking my quaint little maritime obsession. There was silence on the line. Then, click, he hung up. Across the room, Lena glanced up from her screen, barely suppressing a grin. How long until your parents call? I looked at the clock. Right on cue. Margot Carrington's name lit up my phone. Elise Carrington, she barked, her voice sharp as broken crystal. What have you done? Good morning, Mother, I replied, chipper. Bit swamped at the moment, but maybe we can catch up over dinner? Dinner? Are you serious? Do you even realize the chaos you've caused? Your father's had 5 board members on the line already. The Rutledges, the Langfords, the entire club is asking how our librarian daughter just bought Virion Analytics. In the background, I heard my father Charles yelling over another call, issuing frantic instructions like a hedge fund CEO on a bad day. Tell her to come home. Now. I'm in meetings all day, I said honestly. This acquisition is just the beginning, but I'd love to host dinner, my place, 6 sharp. There was a beat of confusion. You mean that cramped apartment near the library? No, I said, reaching for my coffee. I mean my penthouse on Calm Avenue. I smiled, already composing the address in a text. There was a long, disbelieving silence on the other end. Calm Avenue? My mother repeated, her voice a blend of suspicion and disbelief. But that's the most expensive building in Charleston. Is it? I replied airily. I hadn't noticed. See you at 6, Mom. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. 8 years of strategy, secrecy, and careful compartmentalization. Now unraveling all at once in the most spectacular fashion. My reflection in the laptop's dark screen stared back at me, steady, composed, unshaken. Ready for phase 3, Lena asked from behind, tablet in hand. I nodded once, do it. Within moments, the next wave broke. Solera Metrics announces $70 billion 0-cent strategic merger with East Asian Tech Consortium. Seoul, Singapore, Tokyo. This wasn't a fluke. It was a plan, and we'd just detonated it. The timing was deliberate. On the heels of the Virion acquisition, this second announcement signaled something unmistakable. This wasn't opportunism. This was power, precision, legacy. And it bore my name. By the time the Carringtons walked into my home that evening, two of the most disruptive business deals of the decade would be traced directly to Elise Carrington. The daughter they'd dismissed, the cousin they'd pitied, the curator they thought would live and die among dusty archives. The rest of the day passed in calculated motion. An encrypted briefing with my soul team, a legal alignment session with Zurich, and a single, carefully chosen interview with the Wall Street Journal. Background in library sciences? The journalist asked, genuinely puzzled. It teaches you how to manage chaos, I said with a calm smile, to extract meaning from overwhelming information, to read between the lines, and to know exactly when to act. By 5:55 p.m. I slipped out the rear staff entrance of the Charleston Maritime Library. My flats traded for heels, my tote replaced with a structured clutch. A sleek, black car waited just outside, tinted and silent. I stepped in without a word. This ride wasn't taking me back to an old brick apartment near the archives. It was taking me home. The elevator doors opened precisely at 6:00 p.m., revealing the Carrington family standing, a pen, floor. My world, my design, my legacy. Welcome, I said, voice poised. Sakura, to where the real story began. Grant stepped out first, shoulders tight. The swagger drained from his posture. My parents followed, Margot, ghost pale behind her makeup, and Charles, unusually silent. Even Roy, our family's unshakable butler of 30 years, looked as if someone had pulled the rug out from under history itself. Welcome to my home, I said evenly, gesturing toward the sweeping view beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Charleston harbor glowed in the warm hue of sunset, ships drifting like shadows across the gold-lit water. Grant's voice was brittle. How long? I walked to the bar, poured myself a measured splash of Oban, and turned slowly to face him. How long have I been lying? I asked, tilting my head. I haven't. Every word I ever told you was true. I lifted the glass. I am a curator. I do love maritime history. I just also happen to run a global intelligence and investment firm. My mother sank onto the edge of the ivory Italian leather sofa. Her voice, usually crisp as glass, trembled. Why, she asked softly, why keep this from us? Why let us think that I was a disappointment? I offered, placing a crystal tumbler of chilled elderflower tonic on the table before her. Because none of you ever asked the right questions. You saw what you wanted to see. Her lips parted, but no words followed. You imagined a daughter who chose dusty archives over ambition, one who stepped away from power. But silence isn't surrender. It's a form of preparation. My father stood at the glass, his own reflection superimposed over the harbor skyline. All this time, he muttered. Those anonymous bids, the shell companies. That was you? Solarimetrics, Grant said suddenly, his voice low. You're the one behind the blackout firm, the one that kept outbidding us. The knowledge empire, he added bitterly. You built it in the shadows while we were all too busy chasing spotlights. I allowed myself a quiet smile. Knowledge is power, isn't that what you always said, Dad? Charles finally turned to look at me. Really look at me, not as the quiet cousin, the archivist, the one they pitied, but as something else entirely. The Virion deal, he asked slowly. How long were you working on that? 8 months above water, I said, but I started acquiring their key subsidiaries over a year ago. There was a silence then. Not shocked. Not angry, just weighty, shifting, the kind that comes right before respect. Grant's eyes flared. You've been playing me? Not playing, I corrected calmly. Competing. Isn't that what you always claimed to want? A level field? A real challenge to see who's actually better at business? It wasn't fair, he snapped. You had inside access, secret teams, hidden intel. I let out a soft laugh, the sound drifting through the penthouse's vaulted space. You mean like the whispered deals you gather on yachts? The so-called tips you collect at golf tournaments, charity auctions, and club dinners? I set my glass down with a quiet clink. No, Grant. I built this with intelligence, with research, with discipline. Every step was deliberate. Every risk, calculated. Not a whisper. Not luck. Just work. I looked each of them in the eye. This empire wasn't handed to me. It was earned. Through systems you never cared to understand, and patterns you never noticed, because you never thought I could see them. Dinner that evening unfolded like a slow-moving storm. Charged, tense, but quiet. My mother kept scanning the space as if trying to decode the story behind each piece of art, each architectural line. My father remained mostly silent, his jaw clenched, his thoughts clearly rewinding through years of assumptions. Even Grant had gone still. Not smug, not angry, just adjusting. At last he cleared his throat. So, what now? I met his gaze. A partnership. His brows rose in surprise. Harrington Holdings is stuck in traditional lanes. Commercial real estate, old school finance. You need scale, digital reach, global infrastructure. I'm offering that. To my surprise, Charles nodded slightly. Maybe it's time you started learning from her. The air shifted again. By the time dessert was served, bourbon pecan tart with caramel drizzle, the narrative had changed. The librarian they once saw as an afterthought had become the strategist they now needed. Later, while standing in the open concept kitchen with marble counters and glass walls framing the city below, Grant hovered beside me as we skimmed through a shared proposal draft. His confidence had returned, but now tempered with something new. I underestimated you, he said at last, fingers tapping the granite. But I won't make that mistake again. Good, I replied, because I don't plan on slowing down. As the evening wound down, my mother lingered, her hand resting gently on the back of a sleek leather chair. She studied me, not with disapproval this time, but something closer to wonder. Why now, Elise? She asked quietly. Why reveal it all tonight? I paused, watching the lights dance across the harbor. Then I turned to her with a soft smile. Because I finally stopped needing permission to be seen. I paused for a moment, then said quietly, because people need to see that success doesn't always wear bespoke suits and platinum watches. Sometimes, it wears cardigans and carries library cards. To my surprise, Grant nodded, his voice lower than usual. And maybe it's a reminder not to judge someone just because they aren't shouting for attention. After they left, the penthouse settled into silence. I joined Lena by the glass wall, watching the lights of Charleston flicker across the bay. Stocks are already reacting, she said, scanning her tablet. Solera's valuation jumped 12% in the last hour. Analysts are calling the merger visionary. I gave a small nod. We both knew the formal joint press briefing was just days away, and maybe, just maybe, Grant would fully embrace the partnership by then. But tonight had been about more than business. It had been a reckoning, quiet, deep, and personal, one that reshaped how my family saw me and how I saw myself. My mother's trembling apology, my father's quiet, pride-filled glance. They weren't everything, but they mattered. The next morning, I unlocked the side entrance of the Charleston Maritime Library, just as I had every weekday for years. The regulars were already milling in. Historians, school groups, an old professor from Yale who visited once a month. They waved hello, asked if the new navigation exhibit was still on track. No one mentioned Forbes. No one brought up CNBC. And that, to me, was the real victory. Because in a world addicted to noise and prestige, I had built something enduring, not just with money, but with wisdom. I was still Elise, still a curator, still in love with stories, only now I was also the founder of a global empire. A billionaire, yes, but built on data, not drama, insight, not ego. Because knowledge takes many forms. And sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one no one thought to look at. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly dismissed by the very people who were supposed to believe in you, then you understand why I built in silence. I didn't create metrics for applause. I didn't need validation. What I needed was clarity, proof that I could shape something powerful without becoming what others expected of me. And now, standing here in my modest flats and favorite navy cardigan, I want to tell you something. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to fit into someone else's definition of success to change the world. So if my story meant something to you, even a little, leave a comment. Share what you're quietly building, what you've achieved behind the curtain, what you're proud of in your own, quiet, unshakable way. I see you. You matter. And trust me, your story is more powerful than you think. Hit subscribe if you want to walk with me through the next phase, because this isn't just about capital or clout. It's about reclaiming your voice, your value, and your vision. And if you're still sitting at the edge of your dreams, wondering if they're too strange, too soft, or too far from what others expected, here's my advice. Don't wait for recognition. Build anyway. Learn anyway. Show up anyway. Even if they laugh, even if they don't ask, even if they never understand. You don't owe them your explanation. Real success doesn't come from applause. It comes from alignment. So go ahead, break their expectations. And then, quietly, own the room.